He was once the handsomest prince in Europe, tall, athletic, and charismatic. Henry Tudor, who would become King Henry VIII of England, was the golden boy of the Tudor dynasty. But his final years would be a haunting descent into decay, madness, and humiliation. This is not the sanitized version found in textbooks. This is the real, grotesque story of how one of history's most powerful monarchs rotted alive, consumed by disease, paranoia, and his own excess. Welcome to Torture Vault, where today, we reveal the horrifying end of Henry VIII, a man who once ruled England with divine authority, only to die in filth, fear, and putrefaction. Born on June 28, 1491, Henry VIII was never meant to be king. His older brother Arthur was the heir, but Arthur's death in 1502 changed everything. At just 17 years old, Henry became king. For years, he was admired, not just for his political savvy, but for his imposing physique. With golden red hair and a commanding presence, he was the Renaissance ideal, virile, educated, and energetic. Diplomats called him angelic, powerful, and even godlike. But that image, like all illusions, would rot away. The decline began suddenly and violently. In January of 1536, while jousting at Greenwich, Henry's horse collapsed on him. He was 44 years old. The impact left him unconscious for 2 hours, and his right leg, crushed and deeply injured, would never heal. What began as a wound soon became a festering ulcer, one that would torment him until death. The injury festered into a perpetually open sore, leaking pus and reeking of rot. Courtiers said they could smell the king before seeing him, an unbearable, sickening stench. From that moment, his decline accelerated. He gained weight rapidly, losing the athleticism that had once defined him. His waist ballooned to over 130 centimeters, his weight to nearly 400 pounds, 180 kilograms. The once vibrant king was now a man who could barely walk, hauled between rooms by pulley systems like a grotesque puppet in his own palace. The physical pain was only the beginning. What truly terrified Henry's court was the mental transformation. Historians believe that the head trauma from his fall may have triggered neurological damage, intensifying his paranoia, rage, and cruelty. It was after this injury that Henry began executing wives, ministers, and even close friends. Anne Boleyn, his second wife, was beheaded just months after his accident, on flimsy charges of adultery and incest. Was it political, or was Henry simply unraveling? The rot in his body mirrored the rot in his mind. By the 1540s, Henry's ulcers had worsened. Physicians of the time, utterly lacking modern understanding, applied arsenic-laced poultices, boiling iron cauterizations, and bloodletting. These treatments only made things worse. His ulcers grew deeper, exposing bone beneath decomposing flesh. The smell was now overpowering, causing courtiers to faint or retch. But no one could complain. To grimace in his presence was to risk execution. And yet, Henry married again. In 1540, he took Catherine Howard, a teenager, as his fifth wife. The marriage was grotesque. A decaying, obese tyrant and a teenage girl forced to play queen. Catherine, unsurprisingly, found solace in a young courtier. When the affair was discovered, Henry had them both executed, another pair of lives devoured by the king's need to feel in control as his body betrayed him. By 1543, when he married Catherine Parr, Henry could no longer perform even the most basic of royal duties. Parr wasn't so much a wife as a caretaker, nursing the king's wounds, enduring his moods, and cleaning up the filth that now accompanied his every step. In his final years, Henry VIII was a monster in slow decay. Historians believe he suffered from type 2 diabetes, advanced gout, congestive heart failure, and possibly syphilis. His legs had become black with gangrene, leaking pus and blood. Even the stone walls of the palace could not contain the smell. The king lived in near total isolation. Courtiers, terrified of his wrath and sickened by his condition, kept their distance. Only a few servants, paid and petrified, dared approach. Perfume-soaked cloths were pressed against faces, but even that wasn't enough. The king's stench could be detected from 3 rooms away. Delirium plagued him. He muttered the names of dead wives, Jane Seymour, Anne Boleyn, as if their ghosts were calling to him. He feared poison, demanded that food be tasted by others, and had his utensils inspected multiple times per meal. The fear of invisible enemies and silent conspiracies haunted him. On January 27, 1547, Henry finally allowed the Archbishop Thomas Cranmer to be summoned. By then, he could no longer speak. When asked if he died a Christian, he merely squeezed the Archbishop's hand. That was his final act. He died in the early hours of January 28, 1547. But death brought no peace. Even in death, Henry's body was too much to handle. His corpse, bloated and diseased, required a specially constructed coffin. The embalming process of the time was crude. Remove the viscera, fill the body with herbs, seal it, and hope the rot stays in. But Henry's rot was too advanced. The coffin began leaking fluids within days. It was placed in the chapel of Sion Abbey before the funeral, and there, the unthinkable happened. Contemporary chroniclers describe how cadaveric fluids leaked from the bottom of the coffin. Thick, black, and foul-smelling. The fluids pooled on the chapel floor. During the night, stray dogs wandered in, common in the freezing English winter, and licked up the royal ooze. It was a moment of unimaginable irony. The man who had commanded empires, severed heads, and declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, reduced to a leaking sack of meat, his remains violated by scavenging dogs. The funeral, held on February 16, 1547, reeked of contradiction. Grandeur and ceremony cloaked the stench of decomposition. He was buried in St. George's Chapel, Windsor, next to Jane Seymour, the wife who died bearing him his only male heir. The same heir, Edward VI, would die just 6 years later. Henry's obsessive quest for a lasting male lineage had died with a whimper. Henry VIII's death was more than the end of a man, it was the collapse of a myth. A king who once defied the Pope, reshaped religion, and executed queens had died in filth and fear. His body failed him, his mind betrayed him, and history recorded every brutal detail. His daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, would rule England far more effectively. Elizabeth, daughter of Anne Boleyn, the woman he had executed under false charges, would usher in England's golden age. Henry's desperate need for a male heir had achieved nothing. English historian Alison Weir called Henry's life one of the great paradoxes in history. A man who began with so much promise, beauty, and ability ended as a grotesque caricature of himself. The portraits that once showed him as a divine ruler were lies. The truth leaked from his corpse, black and reeking. In the end, Henry VIII serves as a cautionary tale. Absolute power could not save him from gangrene, madness, and decay. The man who rewrote the laws of England could not rewrite the laws of nature. Death did not care that he was a king. It came slowly, oozing from his legs, screaming from his mouth, and finally spilling from his coffin, consumed by the very animals he once ruled.